All right. Well, speaking of things we like, and that's not a transition in any way to what we're
I
going to
don't
talk
know
about.
what you're talking about.
Well, it's my show.
It's your program.
And Jim, last night was someone else's show.
Oh,
It was the season finale of Dark Side of the Ring, the Marty Jannetty episode. It's been an interesting season, and it was an interesting ending to the season.
I don't know if Marty's side is dark or just kind of dim. I don't know Marty that well. I obviously have interacted with Marty on a few occasions at different places in the past. Haven't seen him in many, many years, but was never around him to the point where we were going to sit down and, just have conversations. But I do remember when speaking to him in years gone by that, he's a country boy from Columbus, Georgia, but I wasn't immediately struck with this guy's out of his fucking mind. But I wonder if this condition might have progressed somewhat. But we can analyze this thing from, again, I hate that so many guys couldn't, as Al Snow put it in this, get out of their own way. I know now that I guess he's happy that people still remember him or are talking about him or whatever, but is it that rewarding, Brian, when people are talking about you like, yeah, what the fuck happened to him in that kind of way? Is that kind of notoriety still what you want to aspire to?
Certainly not something you would want to aspire to, but it does seem like he does get a perverse kick out of either creating stories about himself or not saying no about stories about himself or people having stories about him. It doesn't seem like it bothers him.
I don't know. I hate
but it also doesn't seem like he makes good choices and decisions.
Well, yeah, that was a recurring theme in the program. And I hated to see at the start. I had no idea he was in that bad physical condition, that he's in the wheelchair most of the time. His leg and foot was grossly swollen / disfigured, whatever the fuck. It's an ankle injury that he got, almost 30 years ago. But my God, one of the talking heads was his orthopedic doctor, who's a childhood friend. And they asked him, they said, like, well, what kind of pain is Marty in daily on a scale of 1 to 10? He's like 12 on a good day.
That's a doctor.
Jesus. And the Al Snow, the talking heads were Al Snow and the doctor, and Marty Jannetty's, he described her as his St. Louis girlfriend for the past 40 years, Karen, who had interesting insights, and Pat Tanaka, haven't seen him in ages, Brutus and Missy Beefcake. I was not aware that Missy Beefcake, as she was said, his manager, his wife and manager. I didn't know he was still wrestling, didn't know he had a manager.
How long had they been married? Because I didn't realize, too. It seemed like she knew who everyone was. Like, she was talking about Marty Jannetty like she knew him as well as Brutus did.
I don't know. I don't know how long they've been married, but I've never seen her as his manager. Perhaps she's his handler instead, nevertheless. And then Mean Mike Moran.
He was good. I actually thought he was one of the best ones in the whole thing.
But when I first saw him, I'm like, who the fuck is that? And then I realized I never really paid any attention to disorderly conduct, but I remember the Texas Hangmen from years ago.
Yeah.
I didn't, because I was thinking Mean Mike Miller, Nevertheless, anyway, they all universally said throughout the whole program, we love Marty, but he's full of shit. He tells stories that you can't believe, and he's his own worst enemy and always gets in his own way. And if this is your friends, I'd hate to hear what his enemies say about him. But I remember, we've talked about before, right as we were finishing up in Mid-South, I think it was probably September, October, November of '84, that's when Jose Lothario had trained Shawn Michaels and sent him over to Mid-South to, just to work, to get some practice. And he was jerking the curtain and, putting the stars over. And we worked with Sean at that point and said, wow, Bobby even said, this kid's good. He was starting to do spots with Sean because he could already pick up on shit like that. And then, not having any idea that they would have anything to do with each other, we worked with Marty Jannetty back in 1985 when Fritz had booked us out to Kansas City on at least 2 of those 4 or 5 dates we did. And thought the same thing. Why? Because at that point, Marty Jannetty was partners with Bulldog Bob Brown. And obviously,
polar opposites. Can you imagine?
Yeah. Can I imagine? I had to look at it in person.
That's right.
We had to work with it. You can imagine which one of that team that the Midnight, Bobby and Dennis, kept in the ring most of the time, Marty Jannetty. And he was very good at that point. So, we were already familiar with him. But when we saw the Midnight Rockers in the AWA, that pissed everybody off. It pissed the Rock and Roll off, Ricky and Robert, because what the fuck? They're doing their gimmick and the name Rockers, and me and the Midnight were like, how did we get into fucking this? Vern stole both of our names at the same time. And I know it was the Rock and Roll Express Mania, which kind of was like, 2 years after Road Warrior Mania. The Road Warriors get over as the most over tag team in the business, and all of a sudden everybody's got a mohawk and everybody's bodybuilders and everybody's painting their face and wearing spikes and leather. And you went through it was almost 10 years. I mean, every indie, every outlaw show had somebody that looked like the Road Warriors. You remember that.
Of course.
Well, it was the same thing. 2 or 3 years later, starting in 86 with the 85, late 85, when the rock and roll blew up. Then you had every territory. Remember, in Continental, Mike Davis and Tommy Lane were the rock and roll RPMs. And
they were record players.
Yes. And it was a rib that Nick Goulas was still trying to run, his own little independent shows in Central Tennessee. And he had one guy was named Tommy Heggie, who was just a local guy from there. And I can't remember his partner. They were the Stop and Go Express. Like it was like a convenience store, because Stop and Go somehow in somebody's mind that equaled action and then not, I don't know. But the most accomplished of the rock and roll, and really the Rock and Roll Express was an offshoot of the Fabulous Ones, as we all know who have studied our Tennessee history. But the Fabs were completely different in that they weren't tailored to the teeny boppers. It was more of a college girl type of thing. And Ricky and Robert, went for the high schoolers. But anyway, the most accomplished offshoots of the rock and roll, the Fantastics were the best team in the ring. The Rockers were next, but they didn't have the longevity of either the rock and roll or the Fantastics because of all of their issues where they bounced from territory to territory and didn't get a good run anywhere with anything.
Do you consider the Fantastics a takeoff of the rock and roll, or a version of them, or the Fabulous Ones? And to that topic, do you consider the Rock and Roll Express to be because of the Fabulous Ones, or do you see it as two separate things?
Well, the Fantastics' direct lineage was to the Fabulous Ones, but the reason why that they kept getting booked was because of the rock and roll. Because every place where the rock and roll worked and then left, they would want the closest thing they could get to another rock and roll tag team, which would be the Fantastics, which is why, honestly, we've said Bobby and Tommy didn't get over as well in places where the rock and roll had already been as they did in Texas, because they went first before the rock and roll. And in Texas, the girls on the way to the ring were literally ripping their fucking clothes off. And it was a mania over the whole MTV style tag team generation, and it was whoever you saw first. So the Fabs were the the fathers of the whole thing. The rock and roll got to national television first. Vern didn't know what to do with Stan and Steve. And then it took off from there. But nevertheless, so in the AWA, the Midnight Express and the Rock and Roll Express have just had the biggest tag team program of modern times, and up pops Shawn and Marty as the Midnight Rockers because, and I guarantee you somebody suggested that to Vern because I don't even think Vern would have been that hip and cool with the young kids, hey, fellow kids type of thing.
We have a big Russell Rock show coming up.
Yeah, a really big show, and Roger Kent will tell you all about it. I mean, you know, in the early 80s, Vern Gagne's TV announcer still sounded like Walter Winchell. So he was not ahead of his time. But then with Pat Tanaka and Paul Diamond, Bad Company, who were at that point they were the newsletter readers' favorites, right? At that point, because they were so good in the ring, they were having good matches, and the early, you know, Observer readers and newsletter readers, they were kind of a cult favorite, even though, bless them all, nobody drew any money for Vern at that time because the company had petered out.
Well, the thing was, they were one of the only things to watch the AWA to see. Bad Company were a good tag team. Pat Tanaka, as crazy as he may be, and you want to talk about someone who has a lot of stories, Pat Tanaka, he was great in the ring.
Just tremendous. And whatever happened to Paul Diamond?
He later became Max Moon.
But I mean, is he still around?
I don't know. I mean, he's not dead. I mean, he's around somewhere.
Well, that's hopefully the answer I was hoping to hear. But anyway, with the matches with Tanaka and Diamond, and then Buddy Rose and Doug Summers got him a lot of attention with everybody, and that as you said was probably the only reason to watch AWA television at that point, and that was. And then they were out. I think did the original Midnight Dennis and Randy? Did they come in? The Rockers were still there.
Yeah, well, let's see.
Yes.
The Rockers got their WWE tryout, I believe, summer of '87, and then that didn't work out, and they went to Continental. They did the not USWA, it was CWA still, but they did Memphis. They were in the House of Guleen briefly, and then they returned to the AWA, and actually, I think they worked with the new Midnight Express.
I think that's when Dennis and Randy came in, and then they got the Rockers got their chance to go back and try Vince again. But
because they worked with Adonis and Bob Orton, they worked obviously the big one that everyone remembers from '86 is Summers and Buddy Rose with Sherry Martel. They were there for a while on and off.
So, but at any rate, and you said the tryout, it wasn't a tryout. They had been hired. The AWA matches got them over on the TV. They got somebody put a word in. They bring the Rockers to the WWF, and their first night at TV, this was a story all over the locker rooms because, I mean, it took the Freebirds like a week, right, in '84 to get fired.
No, it was a little longer than that, but it was pretty quick.
Maybe even a month, right? But the Rockers came in, debuted on television, went to the bar, got in fucking trouble, fucked up, and got fired in one night. And I can't remember. They said they started throwing glasses and whatever. There was a more elaborate story that I heard at the time. It's been 35 years. I can't remember what the fuck, but it was laughed about in locker rooms across the country that they were already getting a reputation. These two fuck ups went to the WWF and got fired their first night there. That was every fuck up in wrestling had never been able to accomplish that, right?
Well, remember too, if it, again, I'm just doing this off the top of my head, but if it was the summer of '87, that's coming right off Vince having to fire the Sheik and Duggan for getting into the papers for their thing. I'm just thinking about, because Vince put up with a lot of shit and didn't fire people in that era.
Yeah. Oh, yeah. That's why it was all the more remarkable. Their first fucking night. It was like, and they beat the Freebirds. See that right there when you've established yourself in the '80s as being able to out fuck up the Freebirds, you've created, a name for yourself. And that's when everybody starts saying, hey, it's Jannetty's bad decisions. And I love the footage of them in Continental. And remember, that was when Continental, my God, was soon to close up and the buildings were empty. That's where Cactus had, just starting down there, I think, at that point. But the footage of the Rockers, they were teamed with Danny Davis, and he was not amused by the. It's not like that they traveled together, and they did. And then to Memphis, as you said, there were almost no territories left, and they, burnt their bridges. And I'm not even sure if there was even ever discussion of them in either Crockett or WCW, because for most of the time Ricky and Robert were there, but then Ricky and Robert were gone a couple of times. They got mad about
88?
They got mad about payoffs, but at the same time the Fantastics were there, so they really didn't have any place to fucking go.
The other thing is, again, Rock and Roll Fallout with Dusty in the beginning of 88. They're gone for the majority of the year. It's 88 when the Rockers signed with WWE, WWF at the time. If they had come in, even though they were incredibly talented in the ring, unless they had a gimmick change, I couldn't imagine it would have worked as well as the Fantastics, because it would have been a direct ripoff of the Rock and Roll where they were the hottest.
Yeah, it would have. They would have probably been attacked by women in a manner in which they weren't accustomed. The girls in the Carolinas would have probably been beating them with sticks because they weren't Ricky and Robert. Like you said, it would have been the equivalent of when they tried to replace Dog in Mid-South with George Wells and everybody else. It was just almost, you could see through it.
It was like when they replaced the Dukes of Hazzard and they got like two cousins that looked exactly the same with the same hair color and everything.
Yeah, and see, I think that's why Dusty went for Bobby and Tommy when I pitched it, because they were a great babyface tag team, but it was completely different gimmick and look and style of working and the whole 9 yards. So it would hopefully appeal to the same audience without looking like a direct, here's the Great Value version, right? But anyway, they get the second chance in the WWF, and that one was the long run that they're remembered for. But then they went into the Rocker Dropper lawsuit, and I guess it was impossible to explain to a jury, but for us and for wrestling fans and or anybody in the wrestling business seeing that footage back, it was obviously the guy's fault, not Marty Jannetty's. Nobody would take a bump that way. I mean, he jumped up, stood up, and then fucking pushed off to go head first into the fucking ring. If you'd ever not only even seen that move or any kind of move like it, or just had a basic goddamn picture in your head of physics, wouldn't you just do a belly flop?
Well, again, they showed that earlier move from the match where, again, he went head first for something where you're not supposed to. And that was the era where guys could still get in and lie about their experience and get used as job guys. And that's what happened. And they brought up how Dean Malenko was brought into the courtroom to take the rocker dropper, and he popped right back up to show the jury he was fine. I believe the defense, or not the defense, I believe Chuck Austin's side, they brought in like Bruno Sammartino, who I hated Vince at the time. So here's Dean Malenko who could take the modern moves, and here's Bruno like, oh, they tried to kill everyone. Everything's awful.
Well, you know what I was reminded of that pissed me off? After they dropped the guy on his head and he was paralyzed, they turned him over and their finish was the rocket launcher. So they not only stole our names, they stole my fucking move. Anyway, the $20 million judgment was reduced to $10 million on discount.
When you weren't not getting along with Shawn Michaels, did he ever say anything to you about the Midnight Express?
No, we never had a conversation that wasn't about business, or if I was working with him, if I was the manager, about our match, or if I was in the office about what I'd been told that he was supposed to do. I don't think we ever had a personal conversation.
All
I'm trying to think. Nope. Not that I can think of.
Not like, excuse me, Sean, I have your hair if you want it back.
No, never got to that point either. I'll tell you in a minute, interaction that we all had, Sean and I and Marty, but we're not there yet. Apparently St. Louis Karen hates Sean, but she did say that Sean didn't have as bad a habit as Marty had back then. Have you heard the story where I heard they got in a fight at one point. I didn't know that Sean knocked Marty out a hotel room window in that fight.
I always heard that they got into a major blow up in a hotel right before the breakup on TV.
Yeah.
I had never heard those details, though.
And it's pretty obvious that we all knew that Marty won the eventual end of the fight because Sean's 0 for life in actual fights. But so they could have come out and said it, but they hinted around that Sean went and politicked to Vince to break him up and break the team up and make him a single, which obviously is exactly what happened.
Is that wrong, though? If you're Shawn Michaels, is that wrong?
Well, no, it's here's the thing. In this case, it was justified. I mean, he made a lifelong habit of going to Vince, sometimes it might not have been justified, but in this case, he realized that he was moving up, but Marty, for doing all the stupid things that Marty was doing, was going to bury him sooner or later, and he saw the chance to get ahead. Now, here's the thing. Most people would have said, you know what, Marty, I'm going to go ask to be a single because I can't fucking deal with this anymore. But I'm sure Sean just went to Vince and planted the idea and let Vince do it so that, because then, as Marty said, Vince sat him down and said, well, I think I'm going to split y'all up. And Sean's like, okay. Because that's what they'd already been talking about. And it's, obvious.
How often does that happen, though? I mean, I'm sure there's examples I'm not thinking of off the top of my head where there's a tag team and they're successful, and eventually they get to that point where they don't want to work with each other, but one guy has a potential future and one guy, for various reasons, doesn't have that same future. I mean, if Sean's going to Vince and saying, look, I'm taking this seriously, I don't want to be dragged down by what this guy's doing, you can understand why Vince saw his way.
And I mean, that's happened, especially in the territories that used to happen all the time. And I can't call one off the top of my head now, but, because it's been 70 years of history, but you would always get, well, as a matter of fact, we just were talking about the Chris Colt episode of Dark Side of the Ring. Chris Colt and Mike Boyette were two pieces of work, if ever there were ones. And I loved Mike Boyette as a person, but holy mackerel, he had issues. They came into Tennessee as a team, but they never actually made it to Louisville. They made a couple of shots in Memphis, and then they were Mike was on a card or two with Chris, who had a different partner, Bill Dundee, and then Boyette was gone. Apparently, Bill Anderson told Evan and the guys at Darkside that they were coming back from one of the first shows they made in the car in the middle of the night, and all of a sudden, Chris just turned around and started beating the shit out of fucking Mike Boyette for no reason right in the car. And what the fuck? And they put him out and left him on the side of the road. And the next day they went over to Colt's apartment and he didn't even remember that it had happened. But then he went to fucking Nick and said, well, it's us or him. And goddamn, I don't know. It's 2 against 1. Nick can keep the 2 guys or get rid of the 1 guy or whatever. But shit like that would happen all the time.
How about Steamboat and Youngblood? Somewhat of a similar situation where Jay Youngblood was partying a lot and Steamboat wasn't a partier. And even though they were the perfect babyface tag team, for that reason, that was one of the reasons it just didn't work going forward after 1984, 83?
Yeah, because Ricky was, obviously very clean and knew that Jay was in trouble and he couldn't do it. And well, there was Eddie and Jerry Graham.
Yeah.
In New York, in the, they're selling out Madison Square Garden, but Eddie had enough of Jerry and had made the contacts he needed to make and learned things he needed to learn and went to Florida and was successful for 25 years. And Jerry was drunk for 25 years. So, anyway, this one is more well remembered than most because of the barbershop window deal. And I know this was during your heyday as a young fan, right?
I was 11, yeah.
This was unusually violent for WWF television at the time, right? You never saw broken glass, plus the fact that it was a shocking turn because you didn't see turns all the time. You didn't see people get thrown out of windows all the time. But why else was this so well remembered in your mind?
Again, it wasn't an angle-heavy period when it came to the syndicated programs. Brutus Beefcake's Barbershop, I believe, was on Saturdays. That had been the spot way back that had been Piper's Pit, Brother Love, various people throughout the years. In 91, it was the Barbershop. It was a way to get Brutus involved because he couldn't wrestle yet because of the parasailing accident. They were teasing the breakup. The magazine did have stuff. I remember that as a kid. But when Shawn came out there wearing all black, you kind of knew something was about to happen. But no, there was never an angle like that where someone was thrown through the barbershop window. I mean, the most violent things in the years leading up to that, DiBiase stuffing $100 bills down Jake Roberts' throat to choke him, to explain why he had to go to prison for a few months or whatever it was in 1989. There were things like that, but to go through glass, that had never been done. And again, because of the issues with Jannetty, it was like they started it, and then pretty quickly Jannetty was gone, and then he came back to work with Shawn like a year later.
And another of the, we started joking about it at the end of the 90s, he and the Sheik, and they mentioned that. I think Al Snow did. He and the Iron Sheik were running the race. Who can get fired and brought back the most? And the new Rock, I couldn't believe they had video of him in India driving the motorcycle through the hotel lobby.
Oh my God. And when they said he crashed into someone, I'm like, no, he didn't. And yeah, he crashed right into someone and knocked him into the fountain.
I couldn't believe that. And for those of you who didn't see the episode, he borrowed a cop's motorcycle out in front of a 5-star hotel on it. Can I ride? And then gets on it, rides it into the hotel lobby and knocks some mark in the goddamn fountain, wipes out. And that brought him up to the New Rockers in 1996 with Marty and Al Snow. And they said that they thought that Shawn had put a word in for him. Well, I know for a fact that's what happened, and I can tell you how it happened. In July of 1995, we were planning the Smoky Mountain Wrestling Super Bowl of Wrestling. And Al was still working for me. And he was teamed with Glenn Jacobs, who was Unabomb. But at the Super Bowl, Glenn was going to have that match with The Undertaker. And I'd already gotten the date on The Undertaker. So I asked Al, the concept was, for the Super Bowl, we've mentioned it, but basically a championship on the line from every major organization. The WWE Intercontinental title was on the line with the winner of Shawn Michaels and Jeff Jarrett defending against Buddy Landell. And the Smoky Mountain titles were on the line, and the USWA titles from Memphis were on the line. And we basically had somebody from everywhere except WCW. That's why I put in every major promotion, is a little dig. And I went to Al because Al was working also for Gary Woronchak up in Michigan, who was doing Midwest Territorial Wrestling, and Al had his belt, the Midwest Territorial Wrestling Champion. I said, what the fuck? We've got everything else. On the Super Bowl, we've got The Undertaker and Kane, we've got the grudge matches, we've got the angle matches. Al, his thing was being a great in-ring technical wrestler. I said, who can you have the best in-ring wrestling match with on this card of anybody that is available that we can book that's not under contract? And both of us at first said Chris Benoit. And I called Benoit, and he was booked in Japan or wherever. He wanted to do it, but he couldn't do it. And then I went back to Al. I said, we can't get Benoit. I said, who else? And that's when he said, well, what about Sabu? because Sabu was starting to get hot in ECW at that point, and he did a lot of independence. But the folks in Knoxville would have not got Sabu. They'd have been as puzzled as I was of why that he was mad at the table. But also that would have been, Brian, help me. That would have been maybe a high spot match, but not a wrestling match. I was looking for a wrestling match.
Right. And the match you got actually ended up being perfect and was one of the best matches of the night.
Well, and that's why then we said, how about Marty Jannetty? And that's what because Al, again, was doing more independence, so he knew more about who was out there. I said, is he in shape? Is he in jail? What's going on? No, he's fine. So we called him and booked him, and he came, and they did almost 30 minutes, and it was a tremendous match, and it was the technical wrestling match that, that we asked for. But as you know, I sent an entire fleet of the Smoky Mountain Wrestling staff cars over to the airport to pick up. We had a wonderful fleet of Pontiacs. Everybody that I could find that had a car, I sent them to the airport to pick up people that were flying in. And Sean and Marty saw each other at the airport for the first time since 93, the last time he had gotten another chance, and got in a car together and rode to the building together and talked. And within whatever point in time, soon after that, Sean had told him, hey, Marty, he looked great. He had a great match, whatever. He put the word in with Vince that maybe, give him another chance. And so that's how that happened. But by the time that opportunity came up and wound its way, and even then they had to do paperwork and stuff. It's not as extensive as now. Al had started, Al Snow in the WWF as Avatar. And remember, we've talked about that doomed scenario where the first night that Al was there, he tried to do the springboard on the ropes instead of cables, something he had nailed 100 times in a row. I'd seen him. He fell on his ass, and Vince McMahon immediately a circuit breaker flip that he was never going to fucking take Al Snow seriously ever again.
Remember, too, he was a masked wrestler who came out holding the mask in his hand.
Well, that's another thing. That's another thing. Because this was right before I started with the creative team, so I think Bruce tried to explain it to me, but he knew by that point that Vince wasn't caring, so he wasn't putting a lot in. But I don't know what the fuck Avatar was supposed to be. He carries the mask to the ring in his hands and puts it on when the match starts. And there was something about he can do everybody's move because he could do all these moves, right? But it was Vince's simplistic thinking, and then it was put on a fucking guy that then in his mind, oh, fuck, he's doomed forever. So now they got to do something with Al because Vince hates Avatar, but Al's on the roster. So that's when, what about the new Rockers, Marty Jannetty and Al Snow, which got over, in quotation marks, about like we just talked about the Midnight Rockers would have got over following up the Rock and Roll Express. It was ridiculous. And that was very early on in my stint on the creative team. And obviously I liked Al because he had worked for me. I knew him. I didn't have anything against Jannetty as a talent, but when I said the new Rockers, we were thinking of names. Well, Marty Jannetty, everybody knows who he is. I remember Bruce saying, well, what's a Rocker's name? And I don't know if I've told this story or not, but I inadvertently named poor Al. I said, what are you talking about? Teeny bopper fucking rockers like Sean Cassidy or Leif Garrett? And Bruce looked and he got that smile where his mouth spreads out all the way around his jowls and says, how about Leif Cassidy? And I laughed because I thought, yeah, that's good. Yeah, I thought he was joking, right? And he said, okay. And he starts writing. I said, wait a minute, are you serious? He's writing it down. And Vince like, yeah, Leif Cassidy. I'm like, what the Leif Cassidy? So that became Marty Jannetty and Leif Cassidy, the new Rockers. And that was doomed. And, they phased Marty out and let his contract expire, and they loaned Al to Paul Heyman because Paul asked for him, and he started doing the head thing and under his own name, Al Snow. And by the time that Vince remembered that he still worked there, he had established himself somewhat on that TV. And obviously also by that point, Shitstain was around. So Al got to come back in and use his own name and do the thing he had been doing that got him over. I don't know that Vince ever forgave him for Avatar, but at least he got used better because Al, we wouldn't be talking about Al right now if he'd have stayed there and not gone to ECW, because Vince he already had a place on Boot Hill for Al Snow.
All from that one spot in the first match.
And then it became, because all of us, us being Jim Ross, myself, and the agents, Bruce saw Vince's displeasure and did not choose this hill to die on. But when there'd be meetings and it would be something come up, a spot for somebody to have a good match or a spot for somebody, JR would say, what about Avatar? And it got to be one of the things that Bruce would then make fun of when JR wasn't in the room. If Vince would say, well, who could we put in that match or whatever? What about Avatar? He'd do his little impersonation. And it would reinforce to Vince that he didn't like Al Snow. As crazy as all that sounds, that was the way they used to do it. They would figure out if Bruce especially wanted to stir shit, he would fucking say things that are jokes that everybody's laughing about, but he knew which ones would prick Vince to be mad at the fucking poor guy that's not even there, that wasn't even responsible, that wasn't even there. So every time JR would say, what about Avatar? Because he's trying to get Al booked. But then Bruce would make a joke out of it every time you'd mention anybody's name. What about Avatar? And that would remind Vince that he didn't like Al Snow. Moving on.
Should have reminded you don't like Bruce.
Anyway, so Jannetty had several DUIs, was working indies, did a few jail terms on the DUIs, and finally, as they said, quote, hit rock bottom. But then Michaels was on his, well, I guess he was back. He was back from his sabbatical from wrestling from 98 through 2002 or whatever, and now he was on the religious gravy train and invited Marty to a religious ministry deal and baptized him. That, I wish they'd had video of that. And Jannetty said he was clean for like 3 weeks, which was an accomplishment. Did you remember they did a rocker reunion in the WWE in 2005 on, I guess, Raw or SmackDown, one or the other?
Yeah, and I also thought, and I got to go back and check, I thought I remember they brought him back to work with Kurt Angle when they were doing Kurt Angle and Shawn, but I got to go back and check that.
I did not remember the rocker. They showed footage of it. I didn't remember the rocker reunion, but then Jannetty claimed that they offered him $1 million contract to come back because he looked good, but he went to jail because he got in a fight with a stripper. That was 2005, and I was intimately familiar with money that most guys were making because of the developmental program and the money that the guys were aspiring to, and et cetera. And Marty Jannetty did not get offered $1 million contract. If they offered him a contract, which is still pure speculation at that point, and I would think probably not valid, it would have been for like $150,000 downside a year to see what the fuck, if it was even for main roster. But maybe it was he should sue, breach of contract. He can get in on this class action suit with Dwayne and Wayne and whoever these other people are.
He doesn't really seem to be disputing why they fired him or complaining about it. It's just kinda...
No, there was no dispute about anything where he was going to jail, getting DUIs, or fucking up in various ways.
What was it? He had some kind of expression he calls it. It was like God's... It was like...
Wait a minute. Hold on. I wrote it GAT.
GAT. That's what it was.
It's God's amusement toy. When God wants to have fun, he fucks with Marty Jannetty.
In a
That
strip
was
club.
his.
Yeah, somehow
Yeah.
Marty ends up in a strip club every time God wants to fuck with him.
So then they went to the part where he starts making the weird social media posts to get attention. But he claimed the post about his daughter was him being hacked, even though that was no more crazy or misspelled or whatever than any of the other shit that he admits to. But apparently, I don't remember how the story went, but he was wanting to date a girl, and then he found out the girl might be his daughter. And so they had a DNA test, but it found out it wasn't his daughter. But before they found out, he was still contemplating it and asking people if it was wrong. What the fuck was that deal?
I think that was kind of it. I didn't really, we did a segment on things with him way back, but I don't remember all the details.
Yeah, I haven't kept that file handy. But regardless, maybe he was hacked on that one. But then they went into the murder story, which we did, and you can hear that on YouTube, folks. That was just a couple of years ago. It's on the YouTube channel. But the police department in Columbus, I'm sorry.
It's actually on the Funniest Moments Volume 2 Omnibus.
Well, there you go. You can get on the bus and go to the bowling alley where Marty clocked the guy with the rock. And remember, we talked about the police department in Columbus actually investigated it because they don't know, his track record of pulling shit out of his ass. But to get out of it, he told the people or the police that it was a wrestling storyline. But then when Darkseid asks him, they go to the dilapidated, closed bowling alley, and he tells the story, claims the guy tackled him and went for... Now, here's the thing. So he's 13 or 14 years old is what he's claiming when this happened. And he works at the bowling alley, and the guy at the desk that also works at the bowling alley and also sells weed is selling him some weed, but then tries to grab his crotch. Well, then when Marty said no and gets out and runs, now suddenly the weed-dealing bowling shoe dispenser man gets out and runs and tackles him and is going to hold him down and rape him. Does this sound like a big escalation from a weed deal in the parking lot of a fucking bowling alley to begin with? And why would this guy think that, okay, this guy, he knows who I am. We work together. We've got to go back to work here in a minute after I rip all his clothes off and sodomize this kid. We're going to have to go back in and keep renting bowling shoes. But then at that point, Marty gets the rock and bam, and nails him in the head and kills him. And so he calls a quote unquote family member to come over, and they decide, well, it would be a wrong thing to do completely to call the police. So let's just throw the guy in the Chattahoochee River behind those trees. How is that a wrestling storyline that this 60-year-old man is telling on social media in 2020 or 21 or whatever? How can that be called a wrestling story? How can it be called? The whole thing smells, and I don't think anybody except St. Louis Karen believes it. But how would
Al Snow said he heard it in the 90s.
Well, I bet Marty was auditioning the goddamn story in the car, potentially while pilled up. But how is that a wrestling storyline? Hey, cops, no, it was all a big wrestling deal. Oh, okay. You're 60, you look crippled, you don't wrestle anymore, and this is not in any way tied to a wrestling program, but nevertheless. And the police department says they couldn't find any evidence of anybody missing or any other thing to corroborate this. How would this get you booked, Brian?
At the police station or at a wrestling show?
No, I mean on a wrestling show. Would they have him come out and tell the story on Raw or SmackDown, and then suddenly out comes the guy that is the son of the guy that cracked over the head with the
zombie bowling man?
Yes.
It has to be the original guy. It can't be the son.
Way down yonder in the Chattahoochee starts playing. and then here comes a guy with seaweed all over him. It could work.
Yeah, and Marty has one ankle, so he'll be able to work a good match with him. What was going on? I mean, I've seen ankle injuries. What was going on with that?
I don't know. I don't know. His entire leg is grotesquely swollen. I mean, all up to his knee. And they're saying he needs an ankle replacement. Well, yeah, I guess, but I don't know what else could have been going on with that or how that could be that way on an ongoing basis. He's not wrestling, so it's not like he just turned it. I don't know. But nevertheless, his friends love him, and all of them say he's a fuck up. I guess life goals.
Yeah, Brutus's girlfriend or wife, whatever she was at the end, she said
manager to you.
She was going to flash the camera for Marty, but she decided not to.
Well, she was mic'd up, so it would.
That was what it was. She would have
pulled something loose. I mean, can anybody send me a picture of her actually managing someone at ringside? I'm not disputing she's his wife, and I have nothing bad to say about the young lady, but I've never heard of her as his manager or a noted public person.
Well, that was the Marty Jannetty Dark Side of the Ring, the final episode of the season. Any thoughts on the season that was Dark Side of the Ring?
I think except for the detour into hysteria that we got from the Great Northern fella, they did an okay job this year, but a lot of the darkest tales have been told. I think they should take my advice and next season go back to contemplating the fun side of the ring. And we could just have people keeling over and dropping dead from laughter.
Well, of course, Jim, some people keel over because they're tired. They need to take a nap or maybe get some sleep. And if you need a good night's sleep, we have the perfect people to tell you about.
That's exactly right, because our friends at Helix Sleep will give you the best night's sleep of your life. As a matter of fact, you will sleep the sleep of the suspended the suspendedly animated. How would that be the sleep of the
suspended animated?
the people in suspended animation, whatever. As a matter of fact, all you need is like a glass cake cover to put over you when you're laying on a Helix Sleep mattress, and you could be there for 1,000 years. You could be like Sleeping Beauty.
That's not recommended.
Well, you might get bed sores. And actually, Helix Sleep now has a mattress that they've got made of specific material that will not grow into your skin. So if you spend a week or 2 weeks, I don't know, tied down to the mattress for some reason or another, you won't get bed sores. Nobody has to come in daily and flip you. That's just one of the many fine mattresses from Helix, but they've got something for everybody. They've got your pets are going to love these mattresses. Yeah, I mean, your kids, they've got the kids' mattress, and the kids love them. They better love them. As a matter of fact, when you buy one of the kids' mattresses from Helix Sleep, they even send a specific booklet of instructions for your children on how not to piss you off. The do's and don'ts of being a kid.
That is actually not true. There is
and they say, go to bed and close your eyes and stay there asleep until the mom and dad come and get you the next morning, and keep your mouth shut if you know what's good for you.
Well, I don't think that has to be so harsh, but the idea of close your eyes, go to bed, that makes sense. You would stay in your room until someone came to get you?
Well, that's what you're instructed to do, see?
Why do you think that's needed? Why can't you be like...
Actually, when you put one of these kids to bed, the best thing to do is take a strong, like, Vicks Vapor Rub and spread it over their eyelids and tell them to close their eyes.
No.
And if they open their eyes, they're going to get a nasty surprise, and they will keep their eyes closed until the next morning.
That is the worst idea possible. That didn't happen to you, did it?
Well, I may or may not have had a little Vicks by the nightstand every time, when... No, actually, I saw that in a movie.
What movie?
But then one of the 4 rooms, one of the kids figured out you could just get up and take a washcloth and wash it off and then go out and do your own thing.
Ah.
Back to Helix, folks.
Yes.
If you want the greatest night's sleep that you've ever had, you got to be comfortable. That's why Brian sleeps good. I sleep good. All God's chillin' sleeps good on a Helix Sleep mattress because they offer 20 unique mattresses, including the award-winning Luxe collection, Luxe, because they're luxurious. The newly released Helix Elite Collection, the mattress designed for the big and tall sleepers. You can be long or you can be wide. It'll still support you. The mattress made just for kids that we've talked about. And how in the world are you going to navigate yourself through this forest of mattresses? Well, the answer is quite simple. You go to helixsleep.com. That's HELIX sleep.com. And you take their quiz. And in under 2 minutes, or potentially however fast you type, you will find the perfect mattress for you, because they just ask, how do you like to sleep? And we've talked about all the various positions. On your back, on your side, on your face, reverse cowgirl, whatever it may be. They've got models with more responsive foam to cradle your body. As a matter of fact, not only does it cradle it, but it also rocks you to sleep. And in California, that could be an earthquake. We're not sure.
The bed's not going to rock you to sleep.
Well, not if you put it upright.
Not if you put it anyway. It's not going to rock you to sleep.
Well, every once in a while, you get a loose leg on the bed frame, and it's going to rock. And sooner or later, the cradle will fall, and down will come Brian, cradle and all. Models with memory foam layers to provide optimal pressure relief are available from Helix Sleep. A more responsive foam to cradle your body. There's that word again. For essential support in stomach and back sleeping positions. Now, let's say somebody just takes you by the hair of the head on the back of the head and just smashes your face into the mattress. Well, it's got to have some type of responsive foam, or you're going to have a pretty significant fucking spinal injury. But that doesn't happen with Helix, so your sex life is safe. And they've even got a hybrid design combining individually wrapped steel coils in the base with premium foam layers on top and vanilla custard in the middle. It's the perfect combination of comfort, support, and good tasting goodness.
There's no taste. There's no custard and no tasting, but everything else is true.
Did they eliminate the custard filling?
They never had custard filling for their mattresses.
I'm sorry, that was that other mattress company we used to promote. But if they get one from Helix, I'm sure they would have the best vanilla custard, because they got the best quality everywhere else. Right now, it's going to be an upgrade from your old worn-out mattress, especially, I don't know if the kids have been pissing on it or whatever. These kids, especially when they're young, they can urinate all over the place. You never even know it until later on. So if your mattress stinks in your house right now, get a brand new one. Go to helixsleep.com right now and /JCE. A lot of people want to slash me. helixsleep.com /JCE, because they're offering 20% off all mattress orders and 2 free pillows for our listeners right now. helixsleep.com /JCE. The offer is not going to last long. Just like your insomnia won't last long once you lay your beleaguered head down on one of these Helix Sleep mattresses, not to mention the rest of your body. Actually, go ahead and put everything from your head to your feet on this mattress. It can handle the strain. It'll be more comfortable that way. helixsleep.com /JCE.